This is Kelly again from Bray, and we are once more here at the Karstens Ace Hardware in their horse and pet department. And we're going to be talking today about concentrate feeds, which some people call grain, some people call bagged feeds, some people call concentrate. Um, we're going to go over some of those things and help you all select what might be the best bagged feed to sort of round out your donkey's diet. When we talk about concentrate feed, or you talk about grains or bag feed, or in Europe they sometimes refer to it as hard feed, this is typically what you're going to be talking about. So we have a couple of different options here that we'll talk about individually, but typically the reason for this is one, with these little extruded pellets that you see here. So those little extruded pellets, those little things that look like kibble, and that's some extruded pellets and grain, and then here's just oats, so just the grains themselves. So the reason they do this is so your animals can't sift out different portions of it. um, every bite of this little kibbly thing, every bite of these pellets is going to be the exact same. This is actually to give a little bit of interest. So you see you've got these different little corns and things in there, and so that is supposed to keep their interest and improve palatability. So you'll note on these, the things that are not in pellets are the things that are inherently more palatable. They are those grains. So it's not what they're trying to hide any sort of vitamins and minerals in. And then here, again, we just have our whole oats. So the thing about grain is it will be more quickly digested because the particles are ground up into tiny, tiny little pieces. And so it's going to be digested very quickly. A lot of that, if you've got a higher sugar grain, a lot of that's going to hit really fast. And they are getting away from this a little bit at this point. But if you look at the cob mix and things like that, you can see that it's just got molasses poured right over the top of it. It smells outstanding. You absolutely can tell if you open up a bag of cob mix why animals like it. But again, that cob mix we're staying away from. But that's kind of what's going on with these different feeds, and they're very small pieces, you see. And again, these oats, there's a couple of different ways you can get oats. Those are whole oats, and we talked about a little bit. These are whole oats. They've got the little pericarp on them. Those are not going to be as easily digestible as your other type of oats, which are going to be crimped oats or rolled oats. Rolled oats are going to look more like what you get from your Quaker oat thing. They're flattened, so they're really quickly digestible. These actually aren't super digestible. They've got that pericarp on them that a lot of these are just going to pass through undigested. So these are not my favorite to feed really for anything because, to be completely honest, I just don't see a lot of reason to. If you're feeding them as a treat, there are much easier treats to handle as far as you are concerned that are not going to fall out of your hand. And as far as making up some part of your ration, there's a lot of better options that are going to plug those holes a lot more effectively than oats. Typically, when oats are fed to an animal, it's to just get a lot of starches, a lot of carbs in them for things like racehorses. Kind of like before you go run a marathon, you eat a lot of pasta and you carb load. That's basically what you're doing with oats. So oats are not necessarily something that you're going to want to feed because you're just not gaining much. So anyway, these are kind of your different little options for your grains, your concentrates, whatever you want, extruded feeds, whatever you bagged feeds, whatever you want to call them. So anyway, that's kind of what we're looking at. This is more or less what you're going to see in all the bags. Again, they might be different little shapes, they might be different colors, but this is basically what you're looking at. So the first thing we're going to do is we're over here with kind of this all stock sweet feed. So the first thing we're going to talk about is absolutely not to this sweet cob mix. You'll hear us talk about cob mix throughout. Cob is an acronym: corn, oats, barley. That's what's in here: corn, oats, and barley, um, and molasses. Heaps of molasses. There's very, I can't think of any situation where anybody would say feed this to your donkeys. It, maybe, maybe it's a fire evacuation and you've got to do something to get them in a trailer or they're going to burn up, or I say there's no situation where you'd use this. I do know one of our board members who used it to trap her donkey that was fleeing in the desert for 6 months. So in that case, I guess you can maybe use a little bit of fragrant cob mix to get them in. But those are real outlier situations. This, as a general feed, is going to be a no. Don't. This is just candy, and it's not good. Um, Always make sure when you're looking at things, like here, for cattle, sheep, and goats, those are ruminants. Those are not for you. Don't do that. Um, but pretty much any sort of all stock feed, we want to stay away from. Because once more, when we've got cattle, when we've got sheep, when we've got goats, typically those are production animals and they are being fed to produce something, whether that be milk, whether that be meat, whether that be babies. They need to be putting on weight, taking in a bunch of energy to convert it into the babies, the milk, the meat, what have you. Your animal does not need that. We'll talk about some options if you've got a pregnant or lactating Jenny. Those are going to change a little bit how you're going to feed. But for the most part, all of these all stock things are a hard no. Don't. Um, Also, be very careful if you've got other animals on your property that are ruminants. Ruminant feed often has ionophores, so it will have ruminants and it will have tylosan. Those are toxic and will stop equids' hearts at some point. That's the other wild thing. You can't be like, oh, it's a day or a week out, we're fine, we're out of the woods. No, you're not. This can happen up to months later. So stay away from any sort of ruminant feed. That's not for you. You're not feeding a cow. So yeah, that's your hard no, unless you have a very, very specific reason to do it otherwise, and it's a real atypical situation. But for 99.99% of you, absolutely not. So we've gone outside here at Karsten's, and as you can see, they have got just an incredible uh, selection of horse feeds here. They've got a lot of good folks that'll help you make some choices if you need some assistance. Again, this is the Karsten's Ace Hardware on Dynamite, and but a lot of these things are options you can get at any feed store. If your local feed store doesn't have one of these things and you're interested in it, you can typically ask them and they'll order it for you, most often, if it's available in your area. And what I do like about Karsten's is they've got all of these handy dandy labels here, so you don't have to do quite as much walking around dragging things off of shelves. But we are going to walk around and drag things off of shelves to talk about a little bit. So we already talked about a little bit of no's as far as all stock feed and cob mix and things of that nature. But the other thing that I want to address that's a really buzzy word right now is this phrase ration balancer, ration balancing feed. So Enrich is one that a lot of folks talk about, and that's by Purina. And then there's this one over here that's Triple Crown Balancer. And again, I do love that they've got these over here so I don't have to haul these bags around. But a lot of folks tend to think when you talk about a balancer that it's going to be vitamins and minerals and almost nothing else. And something like how I would refer to it is like either what's in the mineral block, or if any of you have goats and do goat minerals, it's just a little handful of things that look like salt that you sprinkle on their food. So a lot of people have the impression that these balancers are kind of that, and that there's not a lot of sugar and not a lot of protein. But I'm going to pull you up here and show you this protein on this Triple Crown Balancer. It says it's ideal for overweight and metabolic courses. It has an incredible amount of protein in it. And so that's really just not something that you need to go for in choosing a donkey ration. We really want to keep that protein down below 14%. There's so many options that have that lower protein. Make sure you're turning your labels over, because that, to be completely honest, I was a little blown away when I saw how much protein that has in it, and it's entirely too much for your donkey. So then we're going to go back over here to this Enrich, and we'll pull this label up here. So we can see here, well, that label's kind of wonky. We'll move this. So this label here has an incredible amount of protein as well. And it does also have, you'll notice on there, it's got molasses, it's got alfalfa, it's got soybeans. This is not something that I would reach for, to be honest with you, for a donkey. That protein's too high. It's got unnecessary sugars in there. Again, that ration balancer is a really buzzy word right now because people have kind of decided grain is a dirty word. Again, like byproducts, they get these words that people decide they don't like, and so they have to come up with other words. So this ration balancer is a really buzzy word, and I'm not real keen on it because they do tend to have much higher protein. They still potentially have a lot of molasses. Here on the back it says be careful feeding it to some of your animals. So, you know, this is not my favorite, to be completely honest with you. This is another one that you would think, you know, this is for a mini horse and pony. Often they are fed as if they're metabolic, very much like a donkey. So maybe this is a good option for my donkey. But we come over here again. The protein on here isn't crazy, but the sugars are pretty high at 7%. And then in our ingredients, it's wheat and alfalfa and molasses. And you're just not, for the amount of things you don't necessarily want, molasses and alfalfa base, this is also just not really answering the questions and filling in the gaps that you want while still leaving behind some of these other issues of, you know, the higher sugars and things like that. So again, those are not my favorite. So the mini horse and pony and the ration balancers, they're not my favorite. They are an option, but again, the ration balancers have such a crazy high level of protein that I just really, unless your vet says, if your vet tells you that's what you should be feeding, and they've seen your animal and they tell you an amount, listen to your vet over me. Your vet's looking at your animal. But as just a place to start, these would not be my choice. A great way to sort out as you're looking through your feed store, if you're just not sure what is a safe feed, is to look for some of these options that mention they're either for metabolic animals, like this here that says low starch, low sugar for horses with special needs. So we have no grains or molasses. And this is this Purina Well-Solve low starch. So if we come over here and look at the label, you'll see that it's not got a terribly high protein. It does list the sugars here, and the max sugars at 5%. And so that's fairly low for what you'll see. And you can look through here and see that, you know, there's not a lot of grain in there. You've got some wheat middlings, but aside from that, you don't have a lot of grain to be looking at. And alfalfa is its first ingredient. But again, we are going to feed very little of this. So in the realm of sort of vehicles that you have to put something for you to mix all of these other ingredients into, you are feeding so little of this that typically the alfalfa is not going to create a big problem unless you have a unique situation. Again, if you have an animal that is super sensitive to sugar, super sensitive to starches, super sensitive to proteins, talk to your vet about what your best option is. But if you've just got your regular general donkey, this Well-Solve low starch is a good option. Another option that I really like, and one of the reasons I really like it, is it's just available pretty much everywhere. Anywhere in the country is going to have Safe Choice as a brand, just like they've got some of these other, you know, easy to find brands like the Purina. But Safe Choice, it's a Nutrena brand, Special Care, And it says right here that it's a controlled starch formula for easy keepers, metabolic concerns, and miniature horses. It's got our important information, or at least part of it, right there. And then if we go to the label, we'll see if we can get this phone. There we go. If we go to the label, and to be honest, the font is a little wonky. I had a moment of panic when I thought that said 34% protein. It does not. It's 14. But then we go down there to the sugar, and it's only 3% sugar, so we do like that. And then we come over here, and so you've got, a few different things as far as how they're formulating this, putting it together. Again, we have wheat middlings, we have soybean hulls, which for those of you who are not familiar with verbiage for feedstuffs, that's kind of the outside shell of soybeans, the woody. If you eat edamame, that's what you leave on your plate, the hulls from the soybeans. It's got rice bran, it's got a little bit of alfalfa meal. So you'll note that it doesn't have any sort of molasses, doesn't have a lot of sugar. So again, this option is a good one, this Safe Choice Special Care, for your donkeys, for just your general filling out of their diet. A new option that's come out recently, again, it's by Purina, is this Omega Match. And it's Timothy based, so you don't have the alfalfa, but they do have these omega-3s, which a lot of animals are missing a bit of. If you notice your animal's got kind of a rough or brittle hair coat, there's a fair chance it's missing some omega-3s in its diet. That's just the case when you're feeding hay and straw, that you don't have a lot of those omega-3s. So this, again, if we look over here, it's got a pretty low protein. It's got pretty low sugar. And let's find our ingredients. So we've got Timothy hay instead of alfalfa. Then we've got flaxseed, some oats, and some rice bran. And then we've got all of our added vitamins and minerals in there. So this is actually a really good choice. And again, if your animal has kind of a sorry hair coat and you're just not really liking how they look and you think they could look a little better, their feet need a little work, this is a pretty good option for you. It is low in proteins. It is low in sugar. And I'm going to take you over here and show you the front. It looks like that on the front. So again, that's a Purina product. We like Purina. They do a lot of research. So that's, and again, I know I did mention be careful when you see ration balancer, but that just means turn it over and look at the label. So this one is labeled as a ration balancer, but it is much lower in protein than most of the other ration balancers that you'll see. So again, that is this Omega Match from Purina. This Omeline line by Purina is also very popular, and they've got a bunch of different levels. You can see they have Omeline 100, 200, 300. They have it all the way up to, I want to say, 600, which is just straight racehorse food. They don't have it at this store because they don't, I guess, feed a lot of racehorses from this store. But if you look at this Omeline Active Pleasure, which is kind of their lowest grade, we go over here again to the tag and we look at it and we're like, you know what, the protein's not bad, but it does not list the sugars. And then we come down here to the ingredients, and it's oats, wheat middlings, corn, and cane molasses right up there on the top. So the thing is, this is going to be high sugar. It's not listed, but we can be fairly confident that's going to have some pretty high sugar, even though it doesn't have a high protein, just from looking at those ingredients. So this is one, and all of these Omeline products are like that. This is one that I would stay away from. It's kind of a retro sort of product. A lot of the older formulations of these bagged feeds would be similar to this, but all of the companies are kind of moving away from that in favor of more forage-based options. This is just sticking around from kind of back in the day. And again, what you can see on there is not really telling a great story. So I would lean towards something that has the complete picture, which is your proteins, your sugars, your starches, and your ingredients. Because what we can see there, proteins aren't bad, but your ingredients are not ideal. Another product that Purina has come out with somewhat recently is this Outlast. And you'll see right there that it's listed as a gastric support supplement. So a lot of their other supplements, or their other grains and concentrate feeds are going to say they've got this Outlast gastric support. And as you can see right there, designed to support gastric comfort. And largely what this is alfalfa, because alfalfa, with its calcium, it does help with uh, the acidity of the stomach, and it does help prevent ulcers and things like that. This is not a bad feed for what it is, which is gastric support, but this is not a vitamin and mineral supplement. So just be aware if you're looking through things and you're like, oh, I need to plug some holes in my animal's diet, this is not for that. Again, they will put it in their other products that are for plugging up some holes in their diet, but that is not what this is for. This is for gastric support. And so, again, not a bad product. Does what it's supposed to do. What it's supposed to do is not plug up holes in your horse's or your donkey's diet. You'll often see people feeding their horses rice bran, and typically that's done to either add weight to them or add what they call a bloom on their coat, so just add some shine to them. This is great for that if you've got a horse that needs some weight and some shine on their coat, but you will see down here um, there's really nothing else going on here as far as nutrition. So you're not going to be adding in any of those vitamins, any of those minerals that they need. If you are looking to get a little more shine on your animal, there's some better ways to do it that are going to add a little less weight to them. Because again, with donkeys, we're always trying to keep their weight down, or not always, but typically. And so rice bran, I do use it on one of my horses, but generally for your donkeys, you're going to avoid this. It's really not going to do a whole lot for you nutritionally, and it is going to add a lot of fat. Another thing you see, and you see it a little bit less than everything else, is something like this. It are these fat supplements. And this is, again, something like the rice bran, where high fat, calorie dense for hard keepers. What they're talking about for a feed like this would be potentially a thoroughbred that's doing endurance and legging up to do 50 miles at a time. If you have a donkey that is truly a hard keeper, you need to be working very closely with your vet, because there is probably something wrong that you need to look into further. This is typically not going to be your number one choice. And if you think it is, you need to discuss with your vet. Another thing that you'll see with a lot of these ration balancers is they'll say things like top line balance, and they'll mention that they're a diet balancer or a ration balancer, and they talk about enhancing the top line. Most of you will see, if you look around at donkeys, their top lines are thoroughly enhanced. Most of them need a significantly reduced top line. That's where your donkeys are carrying all your fat pads. That I see very, very, very few donkeys that would benefit from their top line being improved. And if they would, it's something that can be managed through exercise. It's not typically something that you need to add anything to their diet. You need to actually be doing work on stepping over poles and going up and down hills and things of that nature if your donkey has a, an unfortunate top line, if they've got that sway back, if they've got some kind of protruding bones at the top and a big belly, and you think, oh, their top line looks bad, they might have worms. So there's a lot of other things that you can do before you need to start looking at something like this. Again, top line's really not something that you can feed into a donkey generally, and most animals have entirely too much fat on their top line, so we don't really want to be adding that. We've popped over to another store here to showcase some other options that might seem like they could work for you. They are marketed for folks who just have animals out on pasture and don't necessarily want to do a daily supplementation of uh, feed or a mineral mix or anything like that. So what these are, these what I refer to as pasture lick buckets. And you can see this one says it's for equines. And it says on there that it's suitable for horses of all ages and being fed moderate to high quality forage to just put it out in your pasture, and they will lick on this and get some nutrition from it. I will also point out, as it says right there, it's very upfront about what it is. It's a cooked molasses supplement. And here the first ingredient is molasses. You open this up, and if any of you could smell this, it smells like a brownie. It looks like a brownie. This is something that you 100% do not want to give your animal. They are going to stand here all day and chew on this as if it's a lollipop. This will founder them. Do not feed these to your animals. Here's another one that you might think, oh, that seems like a decent idea. This one actually is going to include some fly preventative in it. So again, this is one of these pasture lick tubs, and it does have this Clarifly, which is a little bit of a, presumably, growth inhibitor of flies. That's typically what these feed throughs are. But again, we're going to go over here. It does have some caution things on the labels. With anything like this, you do need to make sure your dosing is correct, which you're not going to get on a free choice lick. And then as you look at it, it's got this fly inhibitor, but it is also primarily molasses. And if we lift this up, it just looks like a tub of molasses. Do not feed this to your animal. If you want to do feed through fly prevention, there are much safer options. Do not leave your animal unattended with one of these. These are very, very dangerous. The last thing we're going to talk about is some of these senior feeds. So again, Enrich has, most of the companies will have senior feeds available. Enrich has a senior feed, Triple Crown has a senior feed, Purina, Nutrena, everybody has a senior feed. The thing about senior feeds is they're often a more complete feed. They're often going to have generally some alfalfa in them because they are trying to get easily digested smaller pieces of forage, because generally the thought is senior animals don't always have very good teeth. They are also going to be highly palatable. And the thing about making a feed highly palatable is you often are going to have to add in a fair amount of sugars. So senior feeds do often have a fairly high molasses content. So if you look here, again, the protein's not terrible, but it does not list the sugars here. It does, however, list the ingredients. And you'll see it's alfalfa meal, wheat middling, beet pulp, soybean hulls, and molasses. So molasses is often going to be right up top with these senior rations because you're often trying to get these animals that are maybe not super keen on feed anymore to eat as a little bit more than they normally would just on hay. So, and again, this Enrich has super high protein. So unless your vet specifically tells you to feed that, that's probably not a good choice. But again, that's going to have the molasses and everything to make it extra palatable, which most of these senior feeds do. So turn them over, read the label. But for the most part, unless you have a senior animal, you don't need to be feeding senior feed. And even if you do, ask your vet. So again, those are some of your feed options. Another thing that I really like to do is be sure I stick with some of these kind of well-known brands. Purina does a lot of research. Nutrena does a lot of research. Standley does a good job, like I said, with these different hay pellets. I do tend to stick with some of the bigger brands. There are some local mills that do a good job. If you're going to a local mill, I would suggest looking for one that is ionophore free, so they're not producing cattle feed, just to prevent that cross-contamination, because it can kill your equids. But anyway, so those are some of your options for concentrate feeds, and we will go over some supplements in our next video, and then we'll build a ration.